And yeah, all right, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. So all right, so we're gonna start with like a simple function, right? And we're gonna, this whole example, we'll just have a simple function. So basically what we do is we have this function called premium user count, right? Where this is gonna, you can imagine like a database, right? Like that is for like some sort of subscription service, right? Like Netflix or whatever. And we just, it's a simple function, right? We just want to get the customers that are premium users, right? So we just select the number of customers where the category is premium, all right? Now, to set this up, so this is a reading that I'm kind of walking you all through. To set this up, what you can see is in the code directory, we have this create table.sql file, all right? In order to, and if you look at this thing, right, I can cat the create table.sql file. You can see it just has this drop table. If there's a customers table, drop it, and then create a new table for customers. So you can start to see that here. Okay. So we're starting from scratch, and we're using Postgres. Just a little bit of review of Postgres. What we can do is, first I always look, let me make sure the elephant is there to make sure Postgres is running. And then you can type in like PSQL. And remember, that will take you directly to open up the Postgres shell. It will use like the default arguments, like, so for me it just uses my name. And so if you look at like the /coninfo, it's connecting me to database Jeff Katz as user Jeff Katz, right? Which is not exactly what I want. I want to be connected to a database called something, I think it's called like test CRM. I can look at it over here, or CRM test. All right, you'll probably have to create a new one. Let's just do this. We'll do PSQL. Let's say we want to create a new database. So first I'm going to drop the database because I already have one. I can see all the databases that I have if I do the /L, right? And you can see one of them is the CRM test. So let's drop database, CRM test, semicolon, right? And now I'll just create a new database. So this is probably where you are always start off. Is first log into the Postgres shell, and then create a new database called CRM test, semicolon, right? If you don't do the semicolon, it's gonna think you're still like, it's not gonna show you anything. And then probably you'll try it again and be like, wait, why didn't that work? And now maybe you'll put in the semicolon, but this is not like a valid, like it's combining these two statements, right? So that's why it's breaking at line 2, saying create database CRM test, create database, and it doesn't understand what you're doing. So we'll do create, so we'll just go back to create database CRM test, semicolon. And now we see that it says create database. So we kind of are feeling pretty good. And there's our CRM test. Okay. Now I just exited out of the Postgres shell by pressing /Q. And now I'm back in Bash, right? So if I want to connect directly to CRM test, I can do CRM PSQL CRM test, right? And that connects me directly there. If I want to specify the user, remember I can do the /U. You can do like Postgres. The user really just matters about like permissions. You know, if you have the permission to say create a new table in the database, things like that. This is fine, or you could stick with the standard one. What we want to do, however, is we want to run a file. We want to run this file. Oftentimes I'll put these kinds of files in a migrations folder. And these are the files, this create table file. This is just the file that creates the table, okay? So if we want to run this file against the database, we'll do PSQL, the name of the database. So I'll do -d, or you can just, by default, Postgres, knows this is the first argument to this function. So you could do the -d, or you could just write CRM test. And then the main thing is I want to run this file against this database. So how do I do that? -f create table.sql. All right, This is the main thing. So PSQL-D, name of the database, -F, this file. Now press return. It says the customers table does not exist, skipping, right? And then create table, drop table, then create table. So why does it do that? Because we first try to drop this table if it exists, but it does not exist, so it's telling you it's skipping this statement or skipping this operation, and then creating the new table, customers. All right. So now if you kind of connect to SQL to this database, CRM test, you can display the tables with /DT. There we can see the name of the customers, /D. Here we see the columns, right? This is for display the customers table. This is for display tables in general, right? Questions about that, or any Postgres command line stuff to review? All right. So I'll do \Q or /Q, I think, to get out of the Postgres shell. Now I've created my database. I have a test database. And basically now what we want to do is how do we actually check that this function, what was my function? It was this, select, customers where category goes premium, get the count of them. So how many customers are premium customers? And then return that value. How do we test that this works? Okay. So essentially it's the same, if you remember tests in general, this is the same kind of idea where what we need to do is we need to set up, provide some sort of scenario, right? Then run the function and then check the result that it's returning the right value. So in this case, the setup is to populate my database with exactly, a number of customers that I can count, or just I can easily check to make sure this function is actually counting up properly the number of premium customers. So what I'm doing here is I'm writing just an insert statement, inserting to customers, first name, last name, category, these values. Notice I'm doing the %S's. What is this? This is SQL injection, right? So this is, I don't want to directly input those words. Instead, if I do the %S, right, it prevents a user. It's kind of pointless in this case because these are tests. Users are never going to touch them. But you can see what we'll do is if I do the cursor.execute statement, I can use this insert into string, and then I can pass through the values, right? Each of these corresponds to the %S, and then I can, this time I'm inserting a user that's premium, and the next time I'll insert a user that's standard. All right, so the whole point of this is we want to be able to create, a couple users, one premium, one standard, and then we can make sure that the premium user count is 1, right? That there's one premium user. Are you all following this, or questions about this? Yeah? Okay. Cool. So now what do? So we'll do, I basically want to import, you'll notice I don't have, this word is not defined. So I want to, it's defined over here. So I have a file called db.py, and here I'm just connecting to my database as the user Postgres. And then this cursor object, I really don't even need it, I don't think. Because I'll just create it. You'll see. We'll go over here. We'll say from DB. Right. We're not having separate folders for right now. So we say from DB, import the connection object. Okay. And then we can create a connection.cursor. Right, and call that cursor. And let's call this def test premium user count colon, and then just place this here. All right, and now what's next? We insert into these two users. Remember, we're going to have to do connection.commit, right? Because it's this is changing the database. After we do like an insert or a delete or an update statement, we have to commit those changes. And then you can see this is not defined, premium user count. So where does this come from? We could probably, let's see if it tells us what to do. Nah, it doesn't tell us. A quick fix, let's see if that works. Add index, from index, import premium user count. That looks good. So this is the correct type of statement, right? It's from the index file, import the premium user count. All right. So let's go back to test. Oh, wrong one. Sorry, we're here. Okay. So we are importing this, our function. We are importing our connection to the database. We're first doing the setup right here, where we create two users, one premium, one standard, commit it. Then we call the function and check that it returns the correct number of standard users. Yeah, and that should work. I'm going to do pytest test. We are in the lecture.py file, and it breaks. Cannot import name cursor from DB. Okay, where's that breaking? In my index.py file. Fair enough. So I'm reading the error message, right, pretty carefully. So from index.py, apparently we have this line. And let's go to index.py. So it's trying to import this. It's breaking. I mean, I could, the reason I'm pausing here is because what I could do and what I'd kind of prefer to do, I don't think I even really need this statement. I'll tell you why. The reason why is because the way I prefer to set this up is we are, sorry. Here we are. The way I prefer to set this up is when we're calling my function, I'm passing through a connection to the database here. Okay? So the way this works is we are creating the connection to the database. Then we're creating our cursor. We're going to pass through that kind of like cursor into my function. And then in my function, I'm pressing command and then I'm clicking on it to go there. In my function, we are now accessing that same cursor, right? Like, so the same way we can pass through like any data into a function from the test or really from anywhere, like that's what we're doing here. We're just passing through the cursor object into this and then running the function, okay? And that makes sure that it's like against this database that has these users, etc., right? Because it's representing, this cursor is our connection to the database. So it's like, okay, after this thing's set up, then let's pass through my connection to the database, and in there we'll execute select statement and return it. So let's see if that does any better. Okay, that works. All right, you can kind of, you know, if you ever wanted to, right, just like check it, you can just put a breakpoint here or wherever you want, right? You can put a breakpoint here. Let's just do that. So we're first going to hit a breakpoint in the test. So at this point, you can maybe like check, all right, like what is my cursor.execute, select all from customers, semicolon, cursor.fetch all. So just make sure. Oh, look at this. This is going to break, guys. We can talk about why in a second. But this is fun. We have 4 users. We didn't expect that. Okay, so then let's press continue. Now this is going to break. And now we get to index.py. So we're in the next one. So now we do cursor.execute, count star. We can see what the result of this is, cursor.fetch all, or fetch one, doesn't matter. And you can see this is returning 2. Why is this returning 2 users? Where we're looking for category equals premium? Because that previous thing we did, where we saw that for whatever reason, we're duplicating our data. So why are we duplicating our data somehow? It's because we keep inserting into our test database So every time we run these tests, we insert 2 more users and insert 2 more users. So the point is, we are setting up this scenario, right? But we then need to tear down. So after we set up, we're going to need to do a tear down. By tear down, I just mean the following. We need to do cursor.execute, delete from customers, semicolon, and then connection.commit, right? This way, we're starting with a fresh database. In fact, it's normally a good idea to make sure you start with a clean database by just like, this is like, if you think about like cooking, you're like cleaning the table, right? Then you're putting everything in place, right? And then you're cleaning up after yourself, I guess, right? You're making sure you're starting with like a pristine environment, right? And then we are inserting in our just exactly what we want to perform the experiment, perform the test, and then clean up, to mix metaphors, our lab, right? So that's kind of.
Does that completely like erase it now? So like if you had stuff already in it and you're just adding these two to test it, did you just delete everything that was in your database?
Yeah, but that's kind of what you need to do. Like really what happens is you'll have a database just for testing. And then you'll have another database for production data. And generally you'll even have another database, a third database, so I'll put it this way. I'll say you'll have a test database, you'll have a production database. This will have like the real data, and it will probably live on AWS, right? And then you'll also have generally a development database, which is like your console type data, like data that you'll play with in the console, data that, say you ever want to boot up Flask and like see, the JSON returned, right? This, you'll have some sample data in your development database. So this is like kind of like your sandbox database. Like sandbox meaning like it's data for you to play with. So the reason why you need this, right, is, well, the production database, you never, as a developer, you want to be touching this data very rarely. Like you don't even want to, as a data engineer, like sometimes, but like when you're just developing stuff, it's good just to work with test data, especially if you're like any insert, things like that. The test database, remember, we want to set up these like perfect experiments. So for the purposes of tests, we want to be able to like start with something very clean, just set up like our controlled environment where we insert a couple customers, make sure, okay, we get the right answer, then start over, right? Like that's the ideal test scenario. Imagine if we were working on production data with tests, right? Like the number of premium customers is always changing. How do we know this thing is like producing the right result? We don't know. We need to provide a setup. Here we can check the logic of it because we're creating the scenario. But if it's production data, it's hard, right? It's kind of impossible for us to do that. So this is generally what you'll do. You'll write tests that are for a separate database, and this will be your test database. This, by the way, is also why I'm setting it up that I'm passing through the database connection here, because if I want to have a development database, it's not so hard. I can just, over here, just create a new database called CRM dev, right? In fact, maybe we'll do it. Run the migrations, run this create table statement, insert a couple, maybe 10 users instead of 2. And then if I ever want to call the function against my development database, instead of, I can just do something like this. Let's say I wanted to do that. I would just make the connection to let's call this my dev database, right? So I'll do something like from DB import, and maybe I'll call this my test connection. I want, and I'll have the dev connection. And so if I want to make sure I'm running against my dev connection, I'll do my dev cursor, right? And dev connection dot cursor. So create a cursor object that connects to my development database, and then pass through the connection to my development database now, right? And now when premium user count gets called, it's going to select count against, right, against the cursor, the dev, let me go back to it, against the, did I do this in the wrong spot? Sorry, gang. Yeah, against the dev development database. So if I'm passing through the development connection here, whereas here I'm passing through like the test connection. Give me 1 second. Yeah. All right, so that's kind of, we can follow it just to make it more clear. Like we can kind of let me just show you this, how to do this. So we have one test database. So we have this thing as a test database. The problem with the test database is like we kind of always keep like no data in it except when we're running a test. All right, and like our sandbox thing, we want to have some data in there. So for example, like let's say we want to have like a console.py. That would be something, this is like our sandbox, right? We're going to want to be able to say like from index, import star, insert my code, and maybe like here, this is where I'm going to want to like call functions against like my sandbox, right? That has like 10 records in it or something like that. So what do I need to do? I need to create that development database, which really isn't so bad. I'll do PSQL, create database, and now I'll do something like, I just want to keep the same naming convention. We'll call it CRM dev, okay? So now we have this new database. What's the next thing we want to do? We want to make sure it has the same tables, right, as my test database. So we'll do exit out of here, PSQL -d database is CRM dev -f. The file that we're running is create table file. So now we have two databases that are essentially the same, but have different purposes, right? This one is for development, for like our sandbox, playing around with us in our console. This one is for testing. This one's gonna, like, we're gonna basically not have data inside of it because we always want to start off with that clean environment. Here we just want something to like be able to call our functions, mess around. So in my console, I can, or really wherever you want, we can keep it in our dev. We can now from console or from DB import dev connection, right? Or yeah, I think dev, let's do the dev connection. Dev connection from DB, import that. And now if I want to, we could probably, the next step generally is to insert in some data. We can do that. Let's just do that real fast. I'm not sure, generally I wouldn't do this. We can create like an insert data. I'll just do it here for now, just to make it a little faster. But generally I wouldn't put this in my console. And let's call this my dev cursor, right? And let's maybe, you can put in like, you know, have 4 users here. Bob, Sam, Catherine, Sam, Shepard. All right, so now we have these guys. So this is just data for messing around with, like for like, oh, let's, you know, just see how something works. And then we're gonna have other data for like running our test, you know, another environment for running our test. So here we'll do this, and then we want to just do dev connection.commit. Right, and that will insert in our data. So now if we run the console Python 3 console.py, that should have inserted in our data. We can now comment this out, And now, if you look at it, if we run our console, python 3-i console.py, this is a connection to my development database, dev connection, right? You can see that it's connected to CRM dev, all right? And if I do the cursor.execute, right, select all from customers, semicolon, cursor.fetch all, right? Here are the 4 users, right, just for like our sandbox.
Jeff, what does the close :0 mean?
Where is that? Oh, here?
Yeah.
It could be like connections to the data, like it might be like represent like, I wonder if it represents like connections to the database, like whether or not you can close this connection afterwards. So I wonder if this like turns to a 1 or something if like you close it. I'm not quite sure though.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
just curious.
All right. So overall points is that in order to test this stuff, we need to like, start with something clean. That's the ideal thing. Insert and then tear down, right? So do some sort of setup, call the function, delete what you just put in place, like, right? Delete that test data. Because of this, we need a separate test database. In order to choose which database you're executing on, we can just pass through a connection, something that represents a connection to our database. So in this case, we're connected to our test database. I think it's now appropriate to finally change the name to test connection. Let's do that. Let's do that in here as well. And then at a separate time, for instance here, let's say I want to run my console. So in my console, if I want to check out, like give the same function a shot and say, okay, let's call this function. We can do premium user count. And now I'm passing through a connection to my development database, right? Which means that when it runs this, it's going to run, this is going to be run against my development database. And it's still going to hit my breakpoint. Let's just do continue. But why is it giving me 2 customers back for premium? Because there's 2 premium customers in my development database. Is it needed to manually? Yeah, you don't need to. I generally don't like close the connection. Maybe I should be, but just like I have not been like closing the connection, and it's been fine. Okay, so now we're going to go just like a little bit of refactoring with this test thing. All right, so if you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of functions or like where you're doing a similar kind of setup where you're like, okay, let's just insert in a couple customers. Maybe I have another function, for example, that's called like standard user account, right? And so like this will work, this works here. I just changed it to standard and, but I need a test for this too. So like it would get kind of long if for every single test, I spend time like with this setup and tear down, where the real meat of it, like the real kind of like point is the part in the center, right? Is like, all right, now that we know there's 2 customers, 1 premium, 1 standard, right? Like, let's just make sure this thing's returning the right number. So what PyTest allows you to do is it allows to move this component, the setup and teardown, away from this function. And that's where a fixture comes in. So you can say from PyTest, import a fixture, I think. Oh no, actually it's just import PyTest. So it's import PyTest, and then we'll do this. We'll do @pytest.fixture, and then we'll do def, and let's set up like DB with premium customer. So this is where I'm going to move my setup and teardown to. So we're going to move this here. All right. And then I'm also going to, well, you know what? I'll just for now, and I'm going to put this word yield in. And then I'm going to do one more thing. Remember I used to say, like, in this thing, don't put anything here. It's going to break. This is why. Because this is the correct way. If you're using a fixture and you want this test to use this fixture, you put the name of the function in the argument, in this test argument. So now this is what will happen. I'm going to move this. I need to do, I'm missing one line. So just do cursor equals test connection dot cursor. All right. So we can do this here. Okay. So now this is what's going to happen. We're going to run this test, and it's going to see that there's a fixture here. So before it continues, it's first going to run the fixture function. It's first going to run this function. What will this function do? Essentially our setup, right? It's going to delete from customers, make sure our database is clean, insert in the 2 customers, save it, right? Then we're going to hit this word yield. When we hit the word yield, it goes back to running the function and continues. Except normally the teardown is also something that you're going to want to do. So it's going to, for all like tests, so it's going to do the setup, yield to running this, and then go back to deleting from customers. So we'll insert into the customers, create 2 customers, run the test that checks to make sure there's 1 premium customer, and then drop all the customers. Let's see it. We'll put in some breakpoints. Put a breakpoint here. We'll put a breakpoint here. All right, and then we'll put another breakpoint here. And this is all because 1, we're saying we're calling this thing a fixture, and then 2, we're saying, hey, if you're about to run this test, first call the fixture. So now let's exit, and we'll do PyTest test lecture. Yeah, I broke it. Cursor undefined local variable cursor is referenced before assignment. It's happening line 15, so it's happening here. So I guess it's not getting this thing. Interesting. All right, we can do this. The only issue, it's just going to be a little bit harder than the example is going to be a little harder than I wanted it to be. All right, we'll do it this way. I'll explain one more thing. Okay. So this is where we are. We are in line 27. So we have hit this breakpoint, right? Because we've run this test, and then we've hit this breakpoint here. Now we're about to hit the word yield. So that we've done the setup, meaning we've inserted in the 2 customers. You can we can check that or just take my word for it. Then now we're about to yield to this function. So we're going to get to line 35 now. So I'm going to continue. About to hit the word yield. Here we are in line 37. So we're right here. Okay? And now it's going to break because this isn't defined. But if it didn't, it would then hit this. All right? It would finish this and then clean up the mess by deleting all the data, right, that we just created for the test. Oh, it did get there. Oh, that's nice. Look, here it hit our breakpoint. Delete all from customers. So, and now it will still fail, but you can see this is the flow it went through. So we're having this issue, right, which is we create this cursor, but this is a local variable. And so it's like, how do I pass this local variable down to this function, right? This cursor thing, we create it here for the setup, and I want to get it down here. The way you do that is you can do this, yield cursor, okay? Now, what PyTest will do is this will be the cursor object. So now I can pass this through if you want, and that will work. We'll show you that. All right, let's see this. Let me just check the question real fast. Yeah, so this pytest.fixture turns this, the question is, what does pytest.fixture does? This line right here turns this into a fixture. What does that mean to be a fixture? It means that when this function gets run, when our test gets run, it looks for a fixture, a function named db with, whatever this is, okay? So now before going through here, like normally a test will just like run it in order, but this is not going to occur because we're tapping into this special feature. So instead of before running this function, we're going to go back to our fixture, right? Now in our fixture, the setup is being run, right? The whole point is now we get to like set up our database by inserting into customers. We get to yield back to our function to then run, what we're trying to test, which is that the premium user count returns a single user. And then when this is done, we get to delete, clean up our mess of creating the 2 users. All right. And then the new thing we just introduced is the fact that we didn't have access to my cursor, right? We like create this local variable, but how do we get it here? What you can do is yield the, an object. You can pass through an argument, and that will be this thing. So we'll see that. So we just ran the test. Notice that before it got to this line, it's first running the setup because we see this, it sees this fixture thing in the word test, in the function that begins with the word test. So it's running through here. We hit the breakpoint. You can see what the cursor is. Cursor, can we look at the connection is not defined. It's test connection. All right, so the connection, we're connected to our test database. We've created this kind of like cursor object. If I do continue, we're right here. So if I do continue, we'll hit the test. All right, so we're right in the test. And now take a look at what db with premium is. This is our cursor object. Why is it our cursor object? Because you're passing through, this is the argument, and now it's taking what you're passing through as an argument down as this word, okay? So now I can pass through the premium user count, pass through my cursor object, and that will go to premium user count, and that takes the cursor object, runs it against the test database, and returns the result. And now let's do this. So now we just hit, we were about to call the function, we just called it, and now notice we're in the teardown, right? So we were about to call this function, we called it, and now we went back here. So the yield is like temporarily yield the floor, right? Like that type of thing. I'm talking, we're inserting the customers, I'm yielding the floor to this function, and now I'm back to talking. That's the kind of idea. And now I continue, and this will pass. So this is like the way that you test databases, right? And then it feels, I guess, convoluted, but like I said, the nice thing about it is now if I want to, test the standard user count, well, I mean, I should change the name of this, but it's okay. We can now import the standard user count function from index.py, right? And this is the same. The setup is the same, Like I have a couple users in here, one's standard, one's not. I want to make sure that I'm just going to change. We can change. This is getting confusing, this naming. So we can just change it. Last times you'll call this like DB or something like that. DB setup. Because that's what it kind of represents, is your database. All right. So we
So
are, yeah, go ahead.
so can you just, instead of doing feature, like can you just make a function and then call the function test?
Yeah, you can. You can do that. I guess it's like a shorthand for it because you'd have to always call two functions. I guess like so I can see a way that maybe we should just avoid fixtures altogether and just like you were saying, like why don't we just call my call like a setup and then call a separate function called teardown each time. You could do that too. But I did want to introduce this to you because you'll see this like in code. And some people will prefer, a lot of people will probably ask you to write code this way.
Hey Jeff, real quick, the fetch all versus fetch one. I mean, does fetch one just take the first thing? Is that what that means?
Yeah, so, and Christina, I saw your question too. We'll get to it. So if I put a breakpoint here, so we are selecting, right, count star. So just like give me the number of users that are of type standard. So now I do cursor. If I do cursor.fetchAll, this is returning a list with a tuple inside of the list because fetchAll always returns a list. And lots of times it's like a list of records, like select all from users, right? We'll return a list of tuples, right? If I do fetch one, you know, say you're just giving one, like it will just return, it won't return that outer list. Sorry, we're gonna have to run it again, just real fast. So if I do this, and now do cursor.fetch1, it won't return this outer tuple. You see that? Or so that outer list. It just returns.
So do you only use it when you know you have one result?
Exactly. It's a little dangerous to use, I'd say, because you really have to just use it when there's only one result. Yeah, and then Christina asked, is it possible to have more than one fixture in the same file? The answer is yeah, right? Like you can have different kind of like setups, right? So you'll just put @pytest, you know, .fixture, and then you'll do something where it'll be like db setup, you know, and say like, you know, this will be a DB with lots of premium users or something like that, right? Say you need a different kind of setup, right? Or maybe it's like premium, standard, and, you know, like grandfathered in users or long-time users, something like that. So this is, you know, I wanted you to get familiar with it. I think it's worth reading through and practicing this. Like I said, like I want you to be familiar with kind of what you'll see in like a production type code base. Like there's certainly a point to this. I guess it enforces or like encourages this practice of like set it up, call the function, and then tear it down, right? And go back to a clean test database.
Out of curiosity, Jeff, what sort of standards are being used in the code bases of the companies that we might be working at?
I mean,
yeah,
they'll be doing things like this. We do ask them for like sample code bases if they can provide them, because each company may have different kind of style guides. But lots of times, though, like I'm trying to show you the best practices. Normally, this is like, I think that this is pretty like controversial. I get like this, like most companies, right? This is kind of like consensus. I think most of the things I'm showing you are pretty consensus. But you will see, you know, you'll see some differences. So really, as long as you understand the reasoning behind it, right? Like that's the whole point. Because like things that are standard one day and like wisdom, like just like accepted wisdom, like you just wait a few years and like that wisdom people will come up with different reasons, or the technology will change. And as long as you understand the reasoning behind it, right, like you'll be in good shape, because you can then, you know, give your own thoughts, which is what they're looking for. So that's the main thing I'd say. Like Z, I think it was Eli's question about like, hey, can we just call a function here? Like that's a great, that's a great question. Like, why can't I just, have this be a normal function and then have the teardown be a normal function, and then I'll just call a function called, setup here and another function called teardown there. And like, part of the answer is just, oh, well, this kind of nudges you maybe to do it this way. I don't know. Or like we don't even want to see the word setup and teardown below.
Yeah, sorry, just add to that. I think one way probably like makes sense. Like there's a like data intensive processing like going on. Like instead, like if you call function, like it run the function like every time you call it, right? But
there
I
is
guess
things like that.
yeah,
There is things like that. So like with this fixture, there, by default, this fixture will run before every single function call, but you can put an argument. I forget. It's like, I forget if it's like module or something like that says that this fixture will just run once for every for the entire file, right? So do the setup one time, like at the beginning, run all the tests, and then run the teardown. So there's things like that you can do with fixtures also. All right. Other questions about this? Okay. So yeah, we do have a reading on this, and it also has like sample code base, so you can look at that. If you want to review like the Flask models reading, that's probably worth looking at. I'm putting out one more reading, which is like Flask init. It's there to help you with this models lab. If you don't fully understand it, like I'll probably give a lecture on it soon, but give it a shot, and then maybe just like try to push forward with the models lab, and then we can talk about it as well. So you probably will have to go back and do some review, right, and like look at patterns in the readings and things like that to accomplish this lab. All right. You guys remember like kind of like the general gist, right, with Flask, which is that we want to be able to, or we're doing something like this. Do I have the code here? Yeah, that what we're doing is connecting to the database, and inside of here, we're going to create an instance of a player. So we'll take the data, and then we'll maybe import the player model and create an instance. Take this data and initialize a new player object with it. I'll let you all review that. I think that you guys can review that on your own in the models reading, but that's the general idea. All right, let me put you into breakout rooms.